The Chinese thought American soldiers were afraid of bayonets. But then the Americans fixed their bayonets and charged straight at them. What a surprise. Grinning, squinting face. Don't make the same mistake. Subscribe now without fear, because there are always interesting and unexpected facts here. What happened when the Chinese thought U.S. soldiers were afraid of bayonets? Introduction. During the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, the battlefield was a brutal and unforgiving place, where close-quarters combat was often the deciding factor in engagements. One of the most notable misconceptions during this war was the belief that American soldiers were afraid of bayonet combat. This assumption by the Chinese military led to strategic decisions that had unexpected consequences. In this article, we explore the origins of this belief, key battles where it was tested, and how American soldiers responded to bayonet combat. The origins of the misconception. The Chinese People's Volunteer Army, PVA, which entered the Korean War in late 1950, was composed largely of infantry units that relied on traditional combat methods, including bayonet charges. The belief that U.S. soldiers were afraid of bayonets stemmed from a mix of propaganda, observations of initial engagements, and cultural perceptions. Unlike Chinese soldiers, who were trained extensively in hand-to-hand combat, American troops relied more on firepower, including superior artillery and air support. Additionally, during World War II, many nations had begun to phase out bayonet training in favor of modern firearms tactics. The Chinese commanders interpreted this as a sign of weakness, assuming that American soldiers lacked the resolve for close combat. However, this assumption proved to be a critical mistake. The Battle of Bayonet Hill. One of the most famous examples of American soldiers proving their resilience in bayonet combat was during the Battle of Bayonet Hill, which took place during the Korean War. In February 1951, Captain Lewis L. Millett led a bayonet charge against entrenched Chinese forces on Hill 180 near the town of Anyang, South Korea. Despite being outnumbered, Millett and his men fixed bayonets and charged uphill against the enemy. The sheer ferocity and determination of the charge overwhelmed the Chinese forces, who were caught off guard by the Americans' willingness to engage in hand-to-hand combat. The U.S. troops captured the hill, and Millett was later awarded the Medal of Honor for his leadership and bravery. This battle shattered the myth that American soldiers were unwilling to engage in bayonet combat. In fact, the success of the charge demonstrated that, when necessary, U.S. troops could adapt and fight with extraordinary tenacity. Other key engagements. The Battle of Bayonet Hill was not the only instance where American soldiers engaged in fierce close-quarters combat. Throughout the Korean War, numerous engagements saw U.S. troops using bayonets effectively. For example, during the Battle of Outpost Kelly in 1952, American and Chinese forces fought in brutal trench warfare. U.S. troops, often outnumbered, resorted to bayonets and hand-to-hand combat to repel enemy assaults. These engagements further dispelled the notion that American soldiers were unwilling or unable to fight without firearms. The psychological and strategic impact. The realization that American troops were not afraid of bayonets had a profound psychological and strategic impact on the war. Chinese forces, who had previously relied on bayonet charges as a psychological weapon, found that their tactics were less effective against a determined and well-trained enemy. Moreover, the ability of U.S. soldiers to adapt to different combat situations reinforced the importance of flexibility in warfare. The myth of American fear of bayonets was replaced with respect for their resilience and courage. Conclusion. The belief that U.S. soldiers were afraid of bayonets was a significant miscalculation by the Chinese forces during the Korean War. Through battles like the one at Bayonet Hill, American troops proved their ability to engage in close combat when necessary. This misconception not only cost the Chinese valuable strategic opportunities, but also reinforced the reputation of the U.S. military as a formidable fighting force. The lessons learned from these encounters continue to influence military training and strategy to this day.